Hey folks, it's me, Julie. Today I'm talking about word count for books. People talk about this a lot in publishing. What is the appropriate word count range for a variety of genres and age categories? And first of all, I'll say it is something you should know about when you've gotten to the point in your process where you're going to be pitching your book. You should know what the standards are. You should know what the people in charge of accepting manuscripts for agenting reasons or publishing reasons, what they're looking at, what is standard for the industry. But I will say it is always a guideline. It is not a cut and dried rule. And what you want to do when you're trying to figure out how long should your book be, if it's way too long or way too short, you want to avoid trying to find established exceptions that are out there in the book world and saying, well, if this person did it, so can I, because chances are you cannot. If you are, especially if you're an unpublished writer and you're trying to do this for the first time, submitting a manuscript that is wildly out of the expected range for your genre or your age category on either side, either way too short or way too long, citing somebody else who did it, especially if it's a classic or it's something from a very long time ago when the standards were different, that is going to reflect poorly upon you because it will announce right at the outset that you expect to be regarded as an exception. Of course, the exceptions exist. There are first novels that are way longer or way shorter than the standard for the industry. But it's hard enough to get published as a new author, as a complete nobody in the field, without going in with that strike against you. So if at all possible, you should know what the standards are and you should shoot for them. And I'm going to give a little advice at the end of the video of what you should do if you find out that your book is out of the range. But first I'm going to talk about the range. As a person who I don't consider myself to be an expert on this, and I have not been involved in any of the discussions where you would establish these guidelines. I'm no publishing industry trendsetter or anything like that. So, it's not for me to say this is how it is and this is why, and tell you that I have some kind of inside knowledge on this. So what I've really done is just looked up what is expected, and I've looked at a few other sources. Some conflict with each other on what they expect, but it'll at least give you a ballpark of what people who are in those positions are saying about what they expect from you. So I'm just going to quote you some stuff. First of all, of course, children's books are much shorter than books for older kids, young adults, and adults. But, there are some adult books that are shorter than some young adult books. So, first of all, if you write picture books, a standard is 32 pages. So they go by pages, not so much word count. They say, 1,000 words for a picture book is getting a little bit too long, a little too wordy, a little scary. So, they say 300 to 800 words for a picture book. Sometimes it's way less than that. Sometimes it's just one line per page. Some of them don't have any words at all. So, picture books are very unfamiliar to me. I have never tried to write a picture book, and when the children's books go that low, I have also very little contact with the community surrounding those. They're also very art focused, so I wouldn't be the best person to really advise you on that if you're a picture book author, but I will say that there is an expected word count in that category, and you should look up and understand what it is before you go trying to squeeze a whole bunch of words onto your picture book, and then find out that it's not what they expect. So a word about word counts, though. I just said picture books are often about 32 pages, but almost everybody else is not going to expect you to recite how many pages you have, because that actually tells you very little. If you have a dialogue-heavy book, you're going to have a lot fewer words in 100 pages than somebody who has a lot of narration. You know, and you're even talking about font size affecting how many pages you're going to have. You know, I don't know what you mean when you say your book is 300 pages, but I do know what you mean when you say it's 100,000 words. So ultimately, when you are talking to agents or publishers, you need to quote in word count, and you need to get that word count most likely by the readout on your word processing program. There are other ways to estimate it by you know, how many words are on a page, just guessing, but chances are if you're submitting in the modern world through, you know, a technology like you're submitting through email, chances are you have access to these tools that will measure the word count for you. You should always give a round number. You should not give like, oh, my book is 123,671 words. You should never say something like that. It should always be rounded. Okay, so also in the short story world, there is a division between flash fiction versus short story versus novellas. And there are some short fiction markets that will take those, including all the way up to novellas, which can also be kind of on the short side of regular novels. But I will say this about novellas and short stories. It's very tough if you're a first-time author to break into those markets, because they tend not to sell well, and publishers know they tend not to sell well, so it's not your best bet to break into the market if it's your first time trying to sell like a book of short stories or novella. So this readout here says flash fiction can be 300 to 1,500 words. I've even heard of 100-word flash fiction. Short story, 1,500 words to 30,000 words. And you know, as a short story author who tends toward the higher end of the word counts, you know, I still have really never found short story markets that are enthusiastic about accepting short stories that are that long. I mean, I have one that's 20,000 words, and I had a really hard time finding a place for that. Anyway, so going into the more established understanding of what a novel is, basically at 50,000 words they consider it a novel, but you know, there are established adult novel lengths that can go below that sometimes for certain kinds of mysteries or certain kinds of women's fiction. They can be quick and short, like 40,000, 45,000. Again, you'll probably want to look up the specifics of a genre if you know you work in a certain subgenre. Okay, so with children's books, my readout here says 20,000 to 55,000 words encompasses middle grade. And that's kind of what you're looking at as you graduate from picture books. There are also chapter books, which is sometimes considered to be the lower end of middle grade. So chapter books can be like way down in 4,000 words. They can have a lot of illustrations and be essentially short story, all the way up to maybe 10,000 words. But then 20,000 to 55,000 is around what you usually see for middle grade. Now that is a big difference, a 20,000 word book versus a 55,000 word book. So if you're toward the top of that word range, you probably also want to say that you're writing upper middle grade. So that people are not confused that, you know, you're writing this massive book for a very young child. So of course also I want to add a note about the subject matter for those. You know, as they get longer they also get more sophisticated, but for middle grade you don't want to put the types of topics that you would see in young adult books. You need to make it middle grade appropriate. So for young adult, I'm seeing here it says 55,000 words to just under 80,000. Young adult these days is trending longer, so I mean that may be a little bit out of date. The place that I got this, I believe, was written in 2012, and I'm making this video in 2017. Since then I know that young adult has trended longer, and I'll go into this a little bit more later, but especially in speculative genres, fantasy and science fiction specifically. So 70,000 words to 90,000 words is this sort of catch-all pocket where you'll see a lot of thrillers, crime books, mysteries, things that are plot driven and tend to be very punchy with their plot. They're usually like less character driven, more plotty, and so you want them to be fast. You want them to be if you're writing a thriller, it needs to speed along, so you tend to see them on the shorter side for the adult market. Sometimes with, say, mainstream romance, you'll see a similar range, 70,000 to 100,000. And this readout that I have here also says some subgenres will go as low as 40,000 in the romance field. Again, that romance is not really something I write, but I've heard how many very specific rules you have to follow to get published in romance. Not only just the amount of words that you're expected to get your story told in, but also the subject matter and the act format and what has to happen if they get a happily ever after, or if there's a love triangle, or if there's this kind of conflict in it. It's very structured sometimes, and it just depends on who you're trying to publish with. I see here chick lit is one of the genres that is mentioned as a subgenre for romance, and that can be 70 to 75,000 words. You'll be okay. So most novels you're looking at, 70, maybe 80,000 for the lower end, and then up to probably 100,000. You will probably be all right, but as soon as you start seeing a 6-figure word count, some publishers will get nervous, especially if they usually do publish shorter novels and genres that trend shorter. But it's a whole different ballgame when you write science fiction and fantasy, and let me tell you why. It's not just because science fiction and fantasy readers tend to be more patient and want more details, although, we're nerds, so we tend to be patient and like a lot of detail, but also because science fiction and fantasy by its very nature is outside of the reality we know. And because of that, there's going to be more background, there's going to be more world building, and you need time for that. You need more words for that. And it's just expected that more background will be filtering in, more setup for a reality that the reader presumably does not live in. So whether you're dealing with young adult or adult books, if you write science fiction and fantasy, they will tend to be acceptable if they're a little longer. Now, there's some argument about this, of course. Like, I've seen one quote saying if it's 110,000 words, it's too long. I've also seen some people say if you go up to 125,000 for science fiction, that's okay. Some others will say you can go all the way up to 150,000 words for science fiction and no one will bat an eye. That, in my experience, is not true. If you're a first-time author, they may see a word count like that and immediately think you don't know how to shut up. And let me go ahead and go into that a little bit. Long word count, which has been my problem, it continues to be something that I fight when I write. High word counts are just, it's like a way of life for me, and I'm sure plenty of other people, maybe not just science fiction writers, but largely us in the speculative fiction camp, will be fighting these long word counts. We're given a little bit more allowance than most genres, but we're still expected to shut up in a reasonable amount of time. And when they see these long word counts, they will immediately think you don't know how to edit, or you probably have unnecessary description, unnecessary background, you don't know what's important in world building, and that you haven't learned that lesson yet. And that you haven't come far enough on your own to deserve an editor that's going to chop that stuff out for you. This is very complicated because, you might be sitting there thinking, I'm the author. Why should I be letting somebody else decide what's necessary to understand my book? So really, I have no good answer for that. I can just say, if you send it to your critique partners and they're getting bored, they're dropping off of your list of willing test readers, you will rarely see somebody saying, I need more detail from a fantasy author. I got that one time from a publisher. When I was getting a rejection letter, I actually was told that I needed more world building, which is extremely unusual for fantasy authors, but my issues just personally don't tend to be with too much world building. I tend to get real cerebral with my characters and spend a lot of time in their heads. So my padded word counts tend to be because I put too much detail in of what exactly they're thinking about and their rationale, and just spending an awful lot of time focusing on their internal lives. And from here, I think what I want to do is just give a little bit of advice to people who might be looking at their word count and saying, oh crap, I'm already dead in the water before I even start submitting because I'm so far outside of the word count that she mentioned. First of all, don't panic. There's still plenty you can do. I'm going to start with the end of this that I'm not as personally familiar with. If your book is too short, first thing I will tell you is do not react to this by padding it. I have a friend who, I was talking to him about this, and he said he had a novel and he was ready to submit it to agents, and then I asked him what his word count was, and it was like maybe a third of what people in his genre would be submitting. And I'm not saying this to shame him or anything, but he was way, way, way off. He had basically kind of written a long essay, and I had to tell him, look, this is not even up to what a basic adult novel would be, considered to start at. And he said, well, I'm sure that I can pad it out to that. And I was just like, no, don't do that. When you have written something and there's not enough meat in it to put it up to the word count where it's expected, you have a couple of choices. I'm not going to say pad, but I am going to say maybe you should consider interweaving your story with something else that's going on so that it'll have enough meat, so it'll have enough of something to say. So if you're sure you've written a novel and not a short story, you may look for that. You may say, maybe there is more to this story that people who are reading this one would want to know this whole other half of it, and interweave those. That is much easier said than done, of course. But I recommend doing that if what you've written is a novel and not a short story. If you've written a short story, why don't you just try to sell it as a short story and not interrupt the integrity of what you think you've written, not change it so aggressively. The other option for something like this is if you have written something and you think it's this adult genre, but it's very, very short, you might consider maybe it's not really that genre. Maybe it's for someone younger, maybe it's for a different market than I thought it was, and you may try changing the way that you've written it a little bit so that it has a possibility of being accepted in a genre or a category that has a shorter word count. That again is very unlikely to work for, maybe half of the projects out there. For instance, my friend that I mentioned who wrote an extremely short book, there's no way that the subject matter of his book would have been acceptable as a children's book. It was full of swearing and sexual situations. So, there's nothing he could really do in that situation. But it is possible sometimes to say, like, well, maybe I've written upper middle grade, maybe I've written young adult and I didn't know it. But again, I have no personal experience with writing stuff that's too short, so I'm going to go into what I do know more about, and that is we've written something that's too long. I got my first agent after I had to perform an intense word count reduction. And basically, I was told by a couple of agents when I was querying, that they liked my writing, they liked my concept, but they thought my pacing was a little slow, stuff like that. I think bottom line was they may have been just kind of put off by how long it took me to tell the story and how long the word count was. And so I had an agent basically tell me she loved my query, she loved the writing sample that came with the query, but the word count was just way too long, and if I could get it between 85,000 and 110,000 words, she would take a look at the full manuscript. So, after the other feedback I had gotten about the pacing, I decided, I'm going to give this a shot. I had a book that was, I believe it was 146,000 words at that time. I knew it was long. It wasn't prohibitively long like the first draft of it, which was 250,000. But that was like something that I had written an entire book, and later I went back and made it a trilogy, and this was the first volume of that trilogy. Ended up being 146,000 words before editing. So I ended up trying to chop it down to get it down into that range, and I got it to 115,000 words, and I was signed after that. So I mean, it can pay off. But here's the thing. My problem, as I mentioned, is a little bit different from a lot of other fantasy authors where, some of you guys might get caught up in a lot of world building and history and stuff that is detail about either the characters' lives or the world that they live in. And, mine tended to be just spending a lot of time in their heads. So I employed a mixture of two techniques to get rid of words. One was more concept. If I had a scene, if I wasn't totally in love with the scene, or I didn't think that it was extremely important for other reasons, I would say, can I take this scene out and either summarize it or delete it completely? So you can lose a lot of words by just taking whole scenes out. And some of the ways that I was able to determine which scenes to cut was going through and just being real ruthless with it and saying, what does this scene do? And has another scene in this book already done that? The answer was yes a lot of times. Sometimes the purpose of a scene was just to show you that my main character and her antagonists were having continued problems in their school and they were butting heads again. Did anything happen in this scene that established something that the previous scene did not? Sometimes the answer was no, and I would either just cut it completely or I would mention it in a sort of montage. So that got rid of some words. And so option one is cutting whole scenes. Option two is it's the more time-consuming one. It's taking each sentence and whittling it down, taking out unnecessary words. This is something you want to do after you cut scenes. After you cut scenes and you find out how many words you have left to try to get into your desired pocket, then you can kind of estimate, okay, I have this many chapters and I have this many words to lose. I'm going to try to chop 120 words out of each chapter. That might be sort of a bad way to do it because some chapters may need more cutting than others, may have more extra words than others. But if you need some kind of very specific guideline like that where you can just start kicking words to the curb, it's easier than you might think. It's just very time consuming to say, okay, I've got this sentence and I'm going to say it in 5 words instead of 10. It's amazing how many words you can lose just picking sentences out saying them more concisely, and overall you will end up having a tighter book at the end of that as well. It's not just to fit the publishing industry's rules that may seem really arbitrary to you. Tighter books are an easier read, they're a more enjoyable read. And if you're hoping that you can kind of jump through the hoops at the beginning and then later you'll be allowed to just write these sprawling epics and no one will bother you about word count, okay, that's great. But ultimately, books are usually better if more work has been done on how they're told. Your first draft, your second draft, some of your earlier drafts may be sprawling like that because you're still figuring out what to say and how to say it, but once it's down, you can mess with the format an awful lot and still tell the same story. And it may be more accessible. I hate to say this about readers because your readers are your bread and butter, but they can be pretty fickle. If you have ever thought about walking into a bookstore and choosing a book because you like the cover art, I mean, people do that. You've probably done it. Even as you say to yourself, I don't want to judge a book by its cover, but you see great cover art and you say, oh, that's interesting, and it makes you read the back and then it makes you buy the book. It's about packaging, and word count is part of that. Sometimes if you see a big fat book on the shelf and you say, okay, that big fat book is by someone I don't know, I haven't been promised a good time by them before, and maybe it's even thick enough that the book costs more. You may be asking a new reader to invest more of their money and more of their time in you. No guarantees made. So to ask them to do that for you when you are an untried mystery, that's taking a gamble, and publishing is already such a gamble that publishers just, they want you to have the best chance once you're on the shelves. So it's not arbitrary. It's not completely made up that it's got to be this length and you can't possibly tell a good story if it's below or above this. That's not what they're doing. They become business people. They become marketers at that point. Publishers are worrying about the business end. And because of that, they care about trends. They care about what is established to work. And they're a lot less likely to take a chance on you if you insist on being far outside of what has been proven to work. So, it's not that there aren't exceptions, but like I said, you can't count on being one. So I'm saying all of this to give you the best chance at being accepted by these folks who can help you get your book read by many, many people. And I will end here by saying you're not doomed if you cannot or will not squeeze yourself into these expectations. It is possible, of course, that you are the exception and you're the misunderstood genius out there, but the road is going to be hard for you proving that. And if you're determined to be an exception, basically typical advice is not going to work for you, so what are you doing here? So you figure it out if you're outside of what is established as supposedly known knowledge. And again, if you are pointing at somebody like Stephen King or J.K. Rowling saying, well, they've written these horror novels, they've written these children's fantasy novels that are so spectacularly well received and, so far outside of the expectations for their genre, yeah, but look at their first book. Look at Carrie by Stephen King. Look at The Sorcerer's Stone or The Philosopher's Stone, whichever version of it is in your country. Look at those books compared to their later ones, and you will see a much more typical word count. So even they had to prove themselves. They had to jump through the hoops, and chances are you probably will have to jump through those hoops too, just trying to make it easier for you. So I hope that this has helped, and let me know if you have either a question about what I said or a resource you'd like to share in the comments. I would be glad to link some resources for folks who are curious. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.